Hi everyone. I'm going to do a quick overview of Armstrong v. United States, which was the case that you turned in as an assignment just this week. And I just wanted to go over this case because I know some of you struggled with it. And so if you have questions, I hope you'll reach out and ask me for clarification. It is a little bit of a difficult case. It's a lengthy one, but I think this one is one you can all grasp, and a lot of you did. But I just want to make sure that I know some of you are new to case briefing, that you have a solid understanding of how to dissect these cases. So first of all, these are the sections of the case brief for this case. In addition to the header, you would definitely want to include that, which would include the case number, so your citation number, and also the year, a summary of the facts. The procedural history in this case is actually important and lengthy. Most cases it's pretty simple, but in this one's a little bit more complicated. The issue, what is that legal question the court has to resolve? What are the rules? What's the summary of the court's rules that it's explaining before it then gets to the analysis where it applies the rules to these facts? And then the conclusion, what does the court hold? This is a case where there actually were concurring and dissenting opinions, but they're not included in the textbook, so you were not responsible for that. All right, so let's start with the facts of this case. This, at its core, was a drug case, and specifically distribution of crack cocaine in federal court, and also using a firearm in connection with drug trafficking, which adds a lot of time to a potential sentence. The defendants alleged that they were being subjected to selective prosecution on the basis of their race. All of them were Black, and they were saying that the U.S. Attorney's Office was only prosecuting Black defendants for crack cocaine trafficking. And in support of their motion for discovery, what they were asking the court is, we want to see inside the prosecutor's filing cabinets and to look at what cases they filed and what cases they didn't, and what was the race of those individuals. So in support of their motion, they filed an affidavit from a paralegal with experience in drug cases, also a study of crack cocaine cases. There were some news articles as well. I believe there was also an affidavit from somebody who worked in a drug rehabilitation center that looked at race and whether or not cases were being brought against white defendants or defendants of other races. And so they had some evidence that they brought to the court and then asked the court to let them learn more from confidential files in the U.S. Attorney's Office, because they believed that would allow them to show there was a pattern of only prosecuting Black defendants for crack cocaine charges and dropping or plea bargaining the same charges against white defendants. So that's the factual history. The procedural history, you could include all of this in here. The district court granted the defendant's motion, and they asked the U.S. Attorney's Office, or gave a court order for them to provide a list of all cases from the last 3 years in which the government charged cocaine and firearm offenses. Identification of the race of the defendants in those cases, identify which law enforcement agencies were involved in those investigations, and explain its criteria for deciding to prosecute those defendants for federal cocaine offenses. So the court orders this, the U.S. Attorney's Office to provide this information. The U.S. Attorney's Office asked for reconsideration. It's sort of a appeal to the same judge, and they hold an evidentiary hearing, and the court again comes to the same ruling, grants the motion. When the prosecutor said they would not comply with the court order, the judge dismissed the charges against the defendant. So the U.S. Attorney's Office then appealed it up to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, saying that this was that the judge, made an error, that he should not, the judge should not have ordered this. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals upheld the trial court ruling. It went to the en banc, which means, normally when you first appeal to the Ninth Circuit, you get a 3-judge panel. Then they had an en banc hearing, which means all of the judges. And anyway, it gets up to the U.S. Attorney's Office, then appeals it up to the Supreme Court. So that's where we are with this case. And the nice thing about this case is the very first line in the opinion tells us what the legal issue is. What is the showing necessary for a defendant to be entitled to discovery on a claim that the prosecuting attorney singled him out for prosecution on the basis of his race? What is necessary for that defendant to show in order to get that discovery order? So the court looks first at the Fifth Amendment's Equal Protection Clause, same as the 14th, and it says that all the cases around this say that the prosecutor absolutely may not base a prosecution on race or religion or some other arbitrary classification. That would clearly be unconstitutional. We're looking at the Fifth Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. We have looked previously in cases at the Due Process Clause. They are in the same amendments in the 5th and the 14th. So if you're not sure what the difference is between them, this is sort of an aside from the case, where the law limits the liberty of all persons, that's when due process is involved. But where the law treats certain classes of people differently, that's when equal protection is involved. So just to clarify that. It confused me when I was in law school, so I always like to point that out. Okay, so clearly the court says it is unconstitutional to base prosecutions on race. But the court is not the boss of the prosecutors. They are in different branches, co-equal branches of government. The court is in the judicial branch and the prosecutors are in the executive branch. And so it cannot just order the prosecutors to open up their files. There has to be a threshold of showing of evidence before the court will do that. So what is that going to be? Well, the court looks at a lot of different cases and says there has to be some evidence that shows the existence of the essential elements of that offense, meaning they have to bring in some evidence that shows that this is happening. And that it has to be a discriminatory effect and impact. Evidence that the prosecutors have failed to prosecute similarly situated defendants of other races. Now, think about what that requires. When the prosecutors file a case against an individual, there is a public record of that. There's a court case. It is filed publicly. All of that is available to the public. But when they don't file a case, there's no public record of that. So this is a really high standard to meet because what the court is saying is evidence that the prosecutors did not do something, which is hard to show. How do you do that? So the court then applies that test to the facts in Armstrong. And they said that the evidence that the defendants brought wasn't sufficient to meet this high bar. So the evidence that they looked at, they said the study didn't identify individuals who were not Black and could have been prosecuted for the same offense, but were not, that it wasn't quite on point with what their allegation of selective prosecution was. The newspaper article that looked at disparate effect of drug sentencing laws wasn't relative because it wasn't about the decisions to prosecute. It was about sentencing outcomes. And they said the affidavits of the paralegal and the drug counselor were hearsay and were limited to anecdotal evidence. So the court ends up holding that, they reverse the lower court decision and the trial court decision to dismiss the case, meaning the case is going to be reinstated. So this is a case where it's really a good case to look at to see what is the prosecutor's authority, what are the limits on their authority, and what, if there is abuse, how do we as the public show that? What is that standard that we would have to show in order to find out what's going on behind the scenes, to get that information, get that court order to get information that might prove that case? It's a high bar. Prosecutors, again, have a lot of authority and a lot of discretion, but the court stresses if they abuse that authority, by prosecuting people on the basis of race, that is absolutely not allowed and is unconstitutional. All right. As I said, there were dissenting opinions and concurring opinions. They were not in the book, so you did not have to summarize those for your case brief in this case. If you do have questions, I did leave some comments. Look at the rubric on your assignment. Also, reach out to me if you have questions. I am happy to clarify so that you have a good understanding of the case. All right. Thanks, guys.